Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Anton here. So we're back with a brand new video, and we're going to talk about state. So what exactly is state? Well, state refers to the persistence of data in our system. You can think of it like remembering all of the events and all of the data of our variables in the past. So let's say, for example, if we have a button that increments some variable's value by 1 every single time, that is known as updating the state. We are keeping track of the current count of the current value of that variable, and we're going to update that value every single time we click on a button. Obviously, there are other situations where you might need state. So if you want to remember the user's shopping cart items, then you might want to save that in a database or local storage. So the best thing to demonstrate how state works is we're actually going to look at an example. So right over here, I have a simple form component. It's just a basic HTML form. It's just wrapped inside a div, and then we're exporting it as well, and then importing it in app.js, and then we're rendering it over here. Okay, let me just zoom in a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use a hook called useState. Okay, now this is actually pretty new. Back then, there weren't any. Back then, if you wanted stateful components, you would need to use class-based components. However, now with React hooks, we can actually use it for local state in our functional-based component. So to use the useState hook, what we're going to do first is we're going to declare two variables that are going to be actually array destructured. So we're going to have these square brackets, and we're going to declare a field called username because it's going to represent the value of this input. What we're going to do is we're going to bind this variable value to this input element. So const username is going to be the first variable name. The second variable name is going to be set username. You can name your variable values whatever you want, but you want to name it something that can help you resemble what that corresponds to. So in this case, username itself is going to be the actual value. Set username is going to be a setter, or also known as a mutator. And it's actually a function that we're going to call that is going to update this username field. And this is all provided from React useState. So to use the useState hook, we can just reference React because we're importing it up here, and then we can call useState, and then we can set a default value. So I can just set it to an empty string. You can also just import useState from up here, and then you don't need to do react.useState. So when you call useState, basically it's just going to return an array, and we're just destructuring the array right over here. Okay, so username itself is again the state variable, and set username is the function that's going to be used to update the state variable. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use a React event called onChange. Now this is actually technically similar to the HTML onChange event, but React has its own events that are separate from the actual HTML events for a lot of different reasons. But this is the JSX attribute, not HTML attribute. So whenever this input field changes value, it's going to trigger some kind of function. So for example, for now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an inline function. So I have to wrap this inside curly braces. So E, which is going to be the parameter name, which is the event. And we're going to console log it. So now notice how if I refresh, if I type, you see how it says synthetic event, and you can see if I click on target. So yeah, you can see that there's a bunch of different events that are being triggered every single time, but this is not really doing anything right now. So let me refresh again. So what I wanted to do is every single time I type something in, I want that new input value to be mapped to this username state variable. So the way we do that is by using the set username function. So we can just simply call set username, and we can just pass in e.target. So that's the current target of the input field, and then we can just reference value. And now every single time we type something in, it's going to invoke this function. Now, to actually see what's going on, we can actually interpolate this username state variable using curly braces, so we can actually see what's going on in the DOM. So now watch this. If I type ANSON, see how on the DOM it's actually updating. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. I know it can be a little bit confusing, but let's go over it just one more time very quickly, and then we're going to look at a little bit, and then we're going to look at some more examples. So basically all we're doing is we're calling the useState function, which is a React hook, and React hook basically allows us to use React features. And when we call useState, it's going to return an array, and we're destructuring that array by retrieving the state variable as well as the function that's going to update that state variable. And again, you can name this whatever you want. And now what we're doing next is we are taking this input field, and we are using the onChange event, and we're saying, hey, look, every single time onChange happens, whenever we change a value in our input field, we're going to call set username function. We can call whatever function we want, but we want to call set username specifically because we want to update username, okay, the state variable. And obviously we are interpolating the username state variable. So this is pretty cool. Let's do a couple more examples, and then we'll move on to class-based components. So let's just do one for email first. So again, I can name it email and then set email for the setter. And I can even give it a default value too. So let's just say anson@gmail.com. And I can go ahead and interpolate email. And you can see it says anson@gmail.com. So yes, you can set default values. Okay, now let's actually do something with email. So when I type something in, it's going to update. So let's go ahead and say on change, and we're going to wrap the function inside here. And then we're going to go ahead and set email to e.target.value. And remember, e is the synthetic event object, and it's going to refer to the current field that the event happened on. So now let's save. And if I type anson@gmail.com, type this, and let's do the same for password. Okay, and then let's do the same thing. I'm just going to copy and paste it. Set password. And then let's interpolate that as well. Okay, so that's pretty simple. So basically, whenever we type something in, the onChange event is going to be triggered, and then it's going to invoke set username. Okay, so that's a pretty straightforward example. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, now before I end this video, I want to show you a quick example of how to do this with a class-based component. Let's just call this budget form. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and import React from React. I'm going to just speed through this because I'm assuming you guys already know class-based components. But all we're going to do is just extend the React component. You guys probably know this already. All right, so with class-based components, we actually don't need to use the useState hook. We can actually just set the state. And I actually did show you guys this in a previous tutorial. So in this tutorial, we're going to go a little bit more in depth on it. So basically, we have this state object. And we have to call super actually. So we can set properties on this. So let's just say max spending. Like we'll set it to 0 for now, min 0. Okay, and now let's just implement the render. And then we're going to return a simple HTML form. And this is just going to have 2 text fields. And let me just go ahead and import this. Oh, wrong file. And I'll just render this down here. So we have our form right over here. And let's go back to budget form. Okay, so to handle this in class-based components, it's a little bit different. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the same event. That's not going to change. So let's go over here. So on change. And what we want to do essentially is we want to actually call the set state. So there's actually this method called this.setState. And this is going to allow us to update the state. And we can set whatever fields we want. So I'll show you how to do that. So for this on change, what we're going to do is we're going to use an inline function. And this function is just going to call this .setState. And we're going to set, this is what min, so min. And the same thing, e.target.value. And then we'll interpolate this.state, this.state.max. Because we're inside a class-based component, we have to reference this .state. In a function-based component, you don't need to reference this. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So it says 0. What's going on? Oh, whoops. It's min. There we go. There we go. So I can type 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Example of updating the state in a class-based component. And of course, we can do the same thing for this input as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So for this input, it's on change. So whenever the value updates, we're going to call this .setState. Now instead of min, we're going to type max e.target.value. Let's interpolate the value. So this time I'm going to just prefix this with min. I'm going to actually wrap this inside a p tag. And there you go. So you notice how I am specifying the max property this time because I want to update that field. And there are many ways that you can update the state. There are so many different events that you can use to update the state as well. So we'll do one quick one. We got to be really quick. So we'll just add a count property to the state object. And then we'll say count this.state count. So we're going to render that to the DOM. And then we're just going to create a button. So whenever I click this button, it should increment count by 1 every single time. This is going to be a little bit different because we need to know what the previous value of count is. So to get that value, we're actually going to need to pass in a callback function for this.setState instead of an object. So I'll show you how to do that. So first, let's register an onClick event. And this is going to equal to this callback function that's wrapped in between curly braces. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this .set state, and we're going to pass in a callback function, which is going to take in the previous state or the current state's value. Okay, and we're just going to return count prev.count plus 1. So we're taking count and we're assigning it the value of the previous state's count value plus 1. Now if I save and if I go back here, you can see that it's updating. Okay, and now obviously one thing that I would also like to mention is you can actually tighten this a little bit up. So we can also just remove this, and we can actually just wrap this inside a pair of parentheses. So this object itself, so that would make things look a bit more cleaner. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So hopefully this video helped you guys out, and I'll see you guys on my next one. Peace.